They called her outdated, embarrassing, invisible. But when her daughter-in-law mocked her in front of guests, Vivian didn't shout. She clasped her pearls, walked into the courthouse, and rewrote the rules of the home she was being erased from. What they didn't know? She still had the deed. And this time, she wasn't asking for a seat at the table. She was reclaiming the house they tried to turn her into a ghost inside. I moved in on a Wednesday. The sky was an impassive blue, the kind of hue that refuses to match your grief. Harlan carried my bags up the stairs in silence, as if each one contained pieces of my husband's absence. His hands were careful, though not affectionate. Sloane stayed downstairs, adjusting place settings for a dinner that didn't include me. Their house was pristine: marble countertops, ivory rugs, open shelving that displayed not memories, but intention. Each item had a story, but none of them were told aloud. They were implied, aspirational, curated like a home catalog photo shoot. My room was small, tucked beside the laundry closet, with a narrow window that faced a concrete wall. The bedspread was gray, no florals, no warmth, just gray. Sloane smiled when she gave me the tour. "We redid this room last fall. Minimalist, calming." She said calming like it was a command. I unpacked slowly. My sweaters smelled of cedar and attic air. I lined up my shoes along the closet floor: sensible heels, loafers, one pair of orthopedic flats I'd worn to Harold's funeral. The clothes followed: creased blouses, long skirts, my favorite pale blue cardigan with the fraying cuff. I'd worn it the day Harold proposed. There were no velvet hangers here, just slim, bone-colored ones Sloane had left in uniform rows. They made my clothing look like museum relics. The first comment came the next morning. Sloane stood at the island counter in leggings and a perfectly draped tunic, pouring oat milk into her coffee. "You wear a lot of cardigans," she said, not looking up. "They're comfortable," I replied. She smiled faintly. "Comfortable can be dangerous at a certain age." I said nothing, because what could I say? I had never learned how to dress to impress. I dressed for utility, for memories, for weather. Sloane dressed like her body was a brand she'd trademarked. Over the next week, the pattern took root. My dishes were too noisy in the sink, my scent too powdery. My newspaper spread too wide on the breakfast table, and always the wardrobe. "You'd look so much lighter in something with structure," she offered one afternoon as I walked down the stairs in my forest green wool skirt. "I like this skirt," I said. She tilted her head. It makes you look like you're in costume, like you're playing someone older." I was older, but that wasn't the point. Sloane's walk-in closet was a separate world: climate-controlled, color-coordinated, blazers that could cut glass, dresses that spoke in hushed designer syllables, shoes aligned like a military parade. She once left the door open. I peeked inside, not to judge, but to understand. How could something be so full and feel so hollow? My closet, by contrast, was filled with texture. Stories: the cardigan with the missing button from our trip to Savannah, the silk blouse Harold bought me after my book club friends teased I never wore color, the scarf I wore to Juniper's baptism, still faintly smelling of lavender. These weren't just clothes, they were proof that I had lived. The moment it broke was a Sunday, brunch. Sloane's friends, tall women with brittle laughs and sun-kissed wrists, all clinking glasses of Prosecco and sharing stories about school fundraisers and hot yoga retreats. I stayed upstairs, folding laundry, though no one asked me to. The walls were thin. "She wore this peach blouse," Sloane said between giggles, "with these sad little pearls like she was heading to a wake." The laughter echoed, cruel in its restraint. "Bless her heart," another voice chimed in. "She means well, but it's giving thrift store dowager." "Oh, totally," Sloane agreed. "It's like she doesn't even realize how much of what's the word, anachronism she is." My fingers tightened around the pillowcase I was folding. Anachronism, a thing that belongs to another time. I sat on the bed for a long time, not crying, just quiet, bone-deep, marrow-heavy quiet. I looked at the closet, at my things, at the cardigan I'd worn when Harold first said "I love you," hands trembling like the air might vanish if he didn't say it fast enough. I touched the pearls on the nightstand. Not fancy ones, but they were real, Harold had given them to me on our 25th anniversary, slipping the box into my palm like it held a heartbeat. I hadn't worn them since I heard her laugh, but that day I put them on, not because I wanted to prove anything, because they reminded me I still had a name, and I wasn't done saying it. I wore the pearls without ceremony. No grand unveiling, no announcement. Just a quiet, deliberate clasp at the back of my neck as the chatter floated up from the dining room below. They rested cool against my collarbone, their weight familiar, like the echo of a mother's voice in a room she never entered. They'd belonged to my mother, Eleanor, a woman of ironed handkerchiefs and closed-door grief. She wore them on holidays, weddings, and the day she buried her second husband. Jewelry should whisper, she once told me, not scream. I had kept them hidden for years, their clasp rusting slightly, their sheen dulled by silence. But tonight felt right, or maybe just necessary. Sloane was in rare form, glasses clinking, hair tucked just so behind one ear, voice buttery and assertive. She liked hosting, not for joy, but for power. It gave her a stage, a captive audience, a sense of authorship. The wine was expensive, the women curated. One wore Chanel, another Balmain. I wore a blouse that smelled faintly of cedar and thyme, tucked into slacks from a department store no longer in business. Vivian. Sloane cooed as I entered, her eyes narrowing slightly. Look at you, very nostalgic. I smiled gently. Just felt like dressing up. She tilted her head, then poured a glass of red with the precision of someone who'd practiced. You know, I saw a necklace just like that in a museum once. There's something so charming about vintage. It tells a story, even if it's not always current. Laughter floated up, light, forgiving, complicit. I nodded. Well, stories have a way of surviving even when the world forgets who told them. Her smile didn't flicker, but her fingers tightened ever so slightly on the stem of her glass. Harlan said nothing, just reached for the breadbasket, eyes down, as if neutrality were nobility. It wasn't. After dinner, the guests drifted toward the sitting room. I slipped away, retreating upstairs under the guise of needing rest. The truth was simpler. I needed space. I needed air not filtered through judgment or decorum. In my room, I unhooked the pearls with care, laying them across the vanity like a prayer half said. Then I opened the drawer beside my bed and pulled out a notebook. It was just a spiral-bound journal, lined pages, soft cover, no flourish. But it felt sacred, the kind of place where truths didn't need to be measured for palatability. I began to write. Today, I wore my mother's pearls and was laughed at, as if I were a mannequin in a forgotten window. They didn't see grace. They saw dust. Sloane called it vintage. I called it memory. Harlan said nothing. I didn't know why I started journaling. Maybe it was survival. Maybe it was rebellion. But it felt right. Each line reclaimed space that had been quietly stripped from me. I wrote until the margins blurred and the page felt too heavy to lift. That night, I couldn't sleep. Something tugged at me, a restless pull from the back of my closet, the kind of instinct that doesn't explain itself. I opened the trunk at the foot of my bed, the one I'd barely touched since Harold passed. It held keepsakes, old letters, faded photographs, a pressed corsage from a dance in 1973, and then, tucked inside a velvet pouch beneath a stack of cards, I found it, an envelope, unopened. My name in Harold's handwriting, slanted, confident, unmistakably his. My throat tightened. I sat down, holding it like it might vanish if I blinked. The seal cracked with a whisper. Inside, a legal document, the property deed, dated 3 years before Harold died, titled jointly to Harlan and me. My breath caught. He had started the process. He'd meant for us to share it, for me to have standing, voice, a place, but it had never been finalized, never filed. It was a bridge half built. I stared at the signature lines. Harlan's was missing. Had Harold forgotten? Had Harlan refused? Or had Sloane intervened? The questions spun, jagged and dizzying, but one thing was certain. This house was not just a courtesy. I had a claim, even if they had no idea, even if they preferred I never knew. I closed the envelope and slipped it into the journal, between tonight's entry and the next blank page. The pearls still lay on the vanity, reflecting dim light from the hallway. I touched them once more, then turned off the lamp. They could mock my jewelry, they could erase my words at the table. But they didn't know what I just found. And I wasn't going to tell them. Not yet. Every morning began the same way now. I would wake before the others, habit, not choice, and descend the stairs to the immaculate kitchen that never looked used, even after breakfast. Counters gleamed like mirrors. A citrus candle burned in the corner, always the same scent. The dishwasher was emptied before sunrise, as if mess was something this house could never admit to. I reached for my teacup. It was the only one I'd brought. White porcelain, slightly yellowed with time, a hairline crack snaking down one side. My mother gave it to me when I first left home. I drank from it the morning after Harlan was born. I held it during the phone call that told me Harold's test results weren't good. It had no match, no clean lines or brand name, but it was mine. Sloane noticed it on day 3. "Oh," she said, lifting it with 2 fingers like it might bite. "You know we have full sets in the cabinet, right? If you want something a bit more coordinated." I smiled. "I like this one." She didn't press, but the next day the cabinet shelf bore new label maker tabs. T, matching only. Things like that started appearing everywhere. Neat fonts, straight lines, an architecture of quiet control. The pantry shelves, snacks, organic. The laundry room, detergent, fragrance-free. My drawer in the bathroom, guest items. My name was never used, just the placeholder, the absence. Laundry became a battlefield of pleasantries. I folded towels the way my mother taught me, creased edges inward, then rolled into thirds. It made them stack neatly, softly. Sloane watched one day as I did it, then smiled without warmth. "We usually fold them hotel style," she said. "It just looks cleaner in the linen closet." That word again, clean, not better, not more efficient. Just cleaner, code for not yours. I changed the way I folded towels. Dinner was the performance stage. Sloane plated the meals with stylized care, sprigs of herbs no one ate, meals too small to satisfy, table settings worthy of magazines. We were not a family eating. We were a tableau. Harlan sat at the head, passive, always distracted by his phone or a news brief. When he looked up, it was to nod, not to connect. Maisie, only 8, had begun to mimic her mother. One evening, I asked her about her day at school. Simple question, nothing loaded. She wrinkled her nose and said, "Nana, that's not really dinner conversation." I blinked. Sloane smiled faintly at her wineglass. Said nothing. Later, as I cleared plates, my unspoken role, I heard them in the next room. Sloane talking about redecorating. "I think we should finally turn the spare into something useful, maybe a meditation space or home office." The spare? My room. My home within a home. The room with the chipped cup on the windowsill and the photo of Harold tucked into the frame of the mirror. The place where I wrote each night in silence, trying to find pieces of myself amid the curated frost of this house. They never called it Vivian's room. Just the spare. It landed like a bruise. That night, I stood in the kitchen long after the dishes were done. The overhead light buzzed faintly, the only sound in the house. I ran my fingers along the edge of the marble island, too smooth, too cold. Then I saw it, my teacup. Still in the sink, resting awkwardly among the stemless wine glasses. Its crack was wider now. Whether it had chipped further, or whether I was just seeing it clearly for the first time, I didn't know. But it didn't matter, because it didn't belong here. Not the way this house wanted things to belong. I found the slip of paper tucked inside my old day planner, the one with the faded hydrangeas on the cover. The handwriting had softened with time, curling script, the ink bleeding slightly into the fibers, but I still recognized the numbers by heart. Loretta. We hadn't spoken in nearly 4 years. She was the kind of friend time paused for. My college roommate, the woman who once smuggled wine into the dorms in hollowed-out shampoo bottles and dared me to recite poetry on the quad. She'd divorced her husband the year after Harold passed, sold their condo in Denver and moved to a crooked little house near the Maine coastline, where she painted and ate whatever she pleased. I dialed the number before I could talk myself out of it. Viv? She said after the second ring. No surprise, no pause, just my name, like it had been waiting on her tongue. Hey, Retta, I said softly, swallowing the knot in my throat. We talked for 12 minutes before either of us admitted anything real. Weather, politics, a book we both abandoned halfway through. Then, somewhere between laughter and silence, she sighed. You sound like you're fading, she said. I didn't answer. Like someone's drawn a line around you in pencil and started erasing the inside. I pressed the phone tighter to my ear. I didn't think it showed. Of course it shows, she said gently. You've always had a loud soul, Viv. It's why I loved you, but now you sound like you're living in parentheses. I closed my eyes. My voice was barely a breath. I don't know how to fight her. You're not fighting her, Loretta snapped. You're fighting who she made you believe you have to be. I exhaled. She says I'm lucky to have a place, that she's including me. You're not a casserole dish, Vivian, she said. You don't need to be included. You're a person. You're a mother. You raised a man. Now he's pretending that makes you a guest. Her voice lowered, brittle now. You know he called me, right, after Harold died, maybe a year later. That stopped me. He said he was worried, said you weren't doing well, but then he said this. Loretta's voice dropped to mimic Harlan's tone, almost apologetic. Sloan doesn't like when I act like I have a mom. My breath caught. Loretta let it settle. I didn't tell you back then, she added, because it felt cruel, but I'm not holding back anymore. You need to hear it. The line went quiet for a long time. Neither of us filled it. That night, I stepped into the backyard barefoot. The grass was cool, dew starting to gather. Above me, the stars pulsed softly against the indigo sky. Not loud, just sure of themselves. Unapologetic. I tilted my head back, eyes wide, chest open. For the first time in months, I breathed without clenching. I didn't care if the neighbors saw. I didn't care if my toes were wet. I needed to feel real again, connected. Not to this house, but to the sky, the soil, the self I had nearly forgotten. Later in my room, I retrieved the envelope from beneath the stack of winter scarves in the dresser drawer. The deed, the one Harold left, still unsigned, still legally naming me as a co-owner with Harlan. I read it again under the glow of my nightstand lamp, tracing the edges with my fingers. My name, sharp and clear, not in pencil, not in parentheses, ink, permanent. It wasn't just paper, it was a key. I sat there, the night quiet around me, Loretta's words echoing like a new wind. She doesn't like when I act like I have a mom. Well then, maybe it was time I acted like one. It appeared on the refrigerator Monday morning, printed in pastel colors, taped with gold washi, styled like a Pinterest post. Household flow, weekly rolls, the header chirped. Beneath it, names arranged in soft fonts. Sloan, Harlan, Maisie, Vivian. Sloan had written it herself, clearly. She always liked things labeled, named, controlled. Next to Harlan, yard maintenance, trash bins, budget check-ins. Next to Sloan, meal planning, school liaison, decor, strike hosting. Next to Maisie, scribbled in crayon, feed cat, keep room happy. Next to mine, laundry, twos, thurs, bathrooms, sat, pantry restock check, son. No conversation, no request, just delegation. I didn't say anything. I folded towels, scrubbed porcelain, checked expiration dates. There was a quiet rhythm to the work that kept my hands busy, even as my mind scraped against the walls. It wasn't the tasks, it was the ease with which they assumed I'd absorb them, as if invisibility were part of the inheritance. The day after the schedule went up, I ironed Harlan's shirts and folded them the way Harold used to like. Crisp seams, top button fastened, stacked by shade. Harlan never noticed, or if he did, he didn't mention it. Sloan walked in while I was unloading the dishwasher and said, not unkindly but with that performative cheer she wore like lip gloss, "What would we do without our little live-in Martha?" She was pouring orange juice into a crystal pitcher, laughing lightly for the benefit of her friends. It was the monthly brunch, their house, her stage. I laughed too, just enough, not out of agreement, out of preservation. The women in the room didn't react, or maybe they didn't know how. One smiled over her mimosa, another bit into her quiche. No one said the obvious, that I wasn't staff, that I wasn't some quaint live-in character from a domestic fantasy. The air congealed. I placed a wine glass onto the drying rack a little too hard. It slipped, shattered. The sound was surgical, high, clear, final. Everyone froze. Sloane blinked. "Well?" she said, too brightly. "That's why we don't mix glass and dish soap, right?" Polite laughter rippled. I knelt to sweep the shards. No one offered to help. Later that day, as I was folding laundry in the spare room, my room, Maisie wandered in with her usual light steps and oversized t-shirt. She plopped onto the bed and watched me match socks. "Nana? Are you a helper or part of our family?" The question knocked the air from my lungs. I looked at her, really looked. 8 years old, all cheekbones and earnestness. She didn't ask to be cruel. She asked because she was trying to understand the shape of things. I smoothed the hem of a pillowcase. "What do you think I am?" Maisie tilted her head. "I think you used to be Mommy's helper, and now you help Daddy too." I smiled gently, even though my heart clenched. "Do you think I'm just a helper?" Maisie hesitated. "You don't eat with us at the big table. Mommy says you like quiet." "I do," I said, though it wasn't the truth. Maisie stood, skipped over to the door, and turned before leaving. "Helpers don't get rooms with names. You just have the spare." And then she was gone. That night, I sat on my bed with the lamp on low and reread the chore chart. My name, so casual, so obligatory, a fixture. I thought of Loretta's voice in my ear, sharp and warm. "You raised a man. Now he's pretending that makes you a guest." Not anymore. It started with the scarves. They were in a cedar-lined drawer I hadn't opened since Harold's funeral. Dozens of them. Floral, paisley, silk, wool, fringed, faded. Each one wrapped around a moment. A trip, a season, a version of me. I didn't plan to leave, but I did need to know I could. I unfolded the red one Harold had bought me on our 3rd anniversary and laid it flat on the bed. The edges were frayed now, threadbare, but it still smelled faintly of sandalwood and mothballs. Still felt like home. Next came the sewing kit. Tin box, rusted hinge. My initials etched into the lid with a crooked heart Harold had carved with a paperclip. Inside, buttons, faded thread, a pair of scissors with one loose blade. The photographs were harder. I sat cross-legged on the floor and flipped through them one by one. Me holding baby Harlan in a hospital gown 2 sizes too big. Harold asleep in a lawn chair, mouth open, hat tilted. Our old house in winter, windows fogged, smoke curling from the chimney. I boxed them quietly, not labeled, not organized, just preserved, not to run, but to remember. In this house, I had been named everything but myself. Helper, guest, sweet, vintage, extra, invisible. Not once had someone said Vivian with intention. I had become a category, not a character. I was sealing a photo in tissue paper when Harlan walked in. "Whoa," he said, stepping over the lid of the box. "Planning a jailbreak?" I looked up at him. He was smiling, trying to keep the tone light. I smiled back. "Planning options." He chuckled, unsure. "You know you don't have to do that, right? You're settled." Settled, like sediment at the bottom of a tank. "I just want to know where everything is," I said, "in case I want it close." He nodded, already halfway out the door. Later that night, I went to the kitchen for a glass of water. The house was quiet, lights dimmed. Sloane's voice drifted in from her office. Her creative corner, she called it. She was on the phone. "I want clean lines, minimalism. That window faces east, it'll be perfect. Once the transfer's finalized, I want to gut the guest room and turn it into a yoga studio." Silence, then her laugh, tight, low. "She'll be fine. She'll probably be happier with a little cottage or something anyway." My hand tightened around the glass. Gut the room, my room, not convert, not repurpose, gut, as if it were a wound to be cauterized. I tiptoed back to my room and sat on the edge of the bed. The boxes looked different now. Not gentle keepsakes, not quiet security. They were lifeboats. I didn't cry. Not this time. Instead, I labeled one box in pen, small letters, firm hand. Mine. I waited until the house was still. Not quiet, still. There's a difference. Quiet can be tense. Still is when the performance ends, when everyone forgets they're being watched. Harlan was in the den, half slouched on the couch, flipping through headlines on his phone, the glow casting shadows across his face. I stood in the doorway with my cardigan sleeves rolled over my fists. "Harlan," I said softly. He glanced up, blinking. "Hey, Mom, everything okay?" I stepped in. "Do you remember the deed?" His forehead creased, casual guard slipping. "What?" "The house deed," I said. "The one Harold and I signed. I found it." He sat up straighter. "Oh, right, yeah, that." "Why was it never finalized?" I asked, my voice as calm as the ticking clock behind us. He rubbed the back of his neck, eyes flicking toward the hallway as if Sloane might emerge like a summoned spirit. "We just figured it was symbolic," he said eventually. "You were moving in with us. We assumed you'd let go of it." I studied him. The hesitation, the lack of guilt, just discomfort. "Symbolic," I echoed. "So I was symbolic too?" He winced. "Come on, Mom, that's not fair." "No," I said, sharper now. "What's not fair is being written out of my own life while you all smiled and called it hospitality." He stood, defensive. "You're twisting this." "I'm remembering clearly," I replied. "For once." Silence stretched. Then he muttered, "You've always made things harder than they needed to be." I inhaled deeply. There it was. "You wanted me to be grateful," I said, eyes steady on his. "Not equal." He didn't deny it. That was worse. I turned toward the door. "Mom," he said, reaching out. I didn't stop walking. For the first time in years, I walked out of a room while a man was still speaking. I didn't slam doors. I didn't cry. I didn't collapse. I put on my shoes and drove to the library. There was something comforting about the scent, paper and dust and old air conditioning. I sat in the legal section, scanning municipal websites and plain language guides to property law. I took notes, photocopied pages, made a to-do list. Transfer of title, survivorship clauses, notarized consent. They were just words, but I was learning their shape, their weight. On the way home, I passed a bakery that reminded me of my first apartment, back when rent was $400 and I split cinnamon rolls with Harold every Sunday. I bought one for the memory, ate it on the porch in the dark, sticky fingers, butter in my teeth, alive. When I came inside, no one asked where I'd been, and for the first time, that felt like a blessing. I chose the blue blouse on purpose. Not just because Harold once said it made my eyes look like sky after rain, but because it made me feel like I'd come home to my own bones. I buttoned it slowly, the way women of my generation were taught to ready ourselves not just in clothing but in presentation. A quiet armor, slacks freshly pressed, low-heeled loafers, and pearls. My mother's, delicate and firm against my collarbone like memory with teeth. The courthouse parking lot was fuller than expected. I sat in the car a moment, palms resting on the steering wheel, watching people pass by with manila folders and small purses clutched like secrets. Inside, the air was cool and humming, fluorescent lights above, linoleum below. I took a number, waited, clutched the deed with both hands. My name, Harlan's name, the past meeting, the present in ink and obligation. They called my number. I walked to the counter. A clerk with soft eyes asked if I needed help. I said no. "I'd like to file a deed transfer," I said, voice steady. She nodded, walked me through it. Initials here, sign here, date here. My hand didn't shake, not from nerves, not from doubt, only from the gravity of putting years of erasure behind a signature that said, "I exist here too." When it was done, the clerk smiled. "All set. We'll send confirmation to your listed address once it's officially processed." I thanked her, and then I walked outside, into sunlight so bright it made my eyes water, but I didn't blink it away. I let the light have me. I didn't rush to the car, I didn't check my phone. I just stood there, on concrete, under sky, feeling real, whole, present. That evening, dinner was lemon chicken and steamed asparagus. Sloane, always the hostess even without guests, poured wine and held court about real estate fluctuations and minimalist design. "I saw Vivian leaving today all dressed up," she said, smiling thinly. "Big errands?" I looked up from my plate, held her gaze, then nodded once. "You could say that." I sipped my tea. She laughed, light and polished. Harlan smiled vaguely, eyes on his fork. Maisie asked if we could have pancakes on Sunday. No one asked what I'd really done, and I didn't offer. Some victories don't need applause, just breathing room. Later that night, my cell phone buzzed on the nightstand, a number I didn't recognize. I answered anyway. "Mrs. Ellis?" a woman asked. "Yes." "This is Julie from the county registrar's office. Just wanted to confirm the deed transfer went through. You now legally own 50% of the property." She said it like she was reading off a recipe, but I felt every syllable like a tremor inside my chest. "Thank you," I replied, calm as stone. After I hung up, I didn't cheer, didn't cry. I opened my journal instead. Tonight I wrote, "Power doesn't have to be loud. It can sit beside you at the dinner table and wait for the right moment to stand." It started with the curtains. The ones Sloane had chosen were gauzy and cold, pale gray that let in too much light and not enough comfort. I replaced them with soft indigo linen, thicker, warm-toned, heavy enough to suggest privacy, but with a gentle sway when the breeze passed through. Then came the lamp. Brass, slightly tarnished. Found it at a thrift store, weighted and real. It threw a golden glow across the corner where I placed the new bookshelf. Walnut, low, imperfect. I filled it with novels I'd been meaning to reread and photo albums I hadn't opened in years. I didn't ask permission. Sloane noticed the next morning. Her voice floated down the hallway. "Oh, someone's been nesting." I was folding towels on the bed. She lingered at the door, eyes scanning the updates. "It's starting to look like a real room in here." I smiled, said nothing. She waited for an explanation. I offered none. It wasn't a rebellion, it was a restoration. Over the next week, Maisie began to drift into my room more often. First just to ask for help with a loose button, then to borrow a pencil, then without pretext, to sit on the bed and ask questions. "Nana, what are pearls made of?" "Layers of nacre," I answered. "They're made when something gets stuck inside an oyster. Something irritating. The oyster wraps it in layers until it becomes something smooth." She thought about that for a while. "So they start off as a problem?" I nodded, and end up being worn with pride. She smiled. "That's kind of cool." The next day, she brought me one of her old dolls, its arm dangling by a thread, dress torn. "Can we fix her?" I pulled out my sewing kit. Her fingers were small, clumsy at first, but she watched carefully. Stitch by stitch, loop by loop, she learned. We stitched in silence, the soft rhythm of thread passing through fabric louder than the distant hum of the dishwasher, the television, the click of Sloane's heels downstairs. It was a quiet conspiracy. We weren't breaking rules. We were building legacy. On Saturday, I laid out 2 patterns, one for a headband, one for a small pillow, and let Maisie choose. She picked the pillow, selecting yellow thread and a scrap of floral fabric from my old stash. Her tongue peeked from the corner of her mouth as she worked the needle. "You're good at this," I said. She beamed. "Maybe I'll make one for Mommy." "Maybe," I said gently, pressing the seam with my thumb. When the pillow was finished, she placed it in her reading nook. That evening, she whispered, "Can I wear the pearls sometime?" "Someday," I replied, "when you're ready." Not when Sloane says it's appropriate. Not when there's a dinner or a photo op. When she was ready. Maisie nodded, satisfied. As the sun dipped behind the blinds, we sat side by side, 2 generations bent over soft cloth and quiet resilience, while the world outside buzzed and judged and rearranged itself. We didn't need it to approve. We were learning the shape of our own belonging. The invitation came like all the others. Via group text, Sloane's name at the top, a curated emoji trail, a themed menu already selected. Small plates and summer whites, it said. Dress code, casual chic. I dressed with intention, not rebellion. Soft cream slacks, the blue blouse, and the pearls, my mother's now mine. Their familiar coolness against my throat no longer reminded me of morning. They anchored me, carried stories in their sheen. I didn't ask if I looked okay. I didn't wait in the hallway to be ushered in. I walked into the dining room as if I had never left it. Sloane stood at the center, arranging wine bottles, her smile stretched taut by habit. The guests had already arrived, two couples from the neighborhood, one of Harlan's coworkers and his wife, a mother from Maisie's school. Chatter floated in the air like perfume. Polished, comfortable. Until Sloane spotted the pearls, her smile sharpened. "Look at you, Vivian," she said, loud enough for all to hear. "Keeping the vintage vibe alive. I swear you're a walking tribute to heirlooms." Laughter, brief but not total. One of the women blinked, her eyes shifting from Sloane to me. I didn't blink. "Funny how something old can still outlast trends," I replied evenly, reaching for a glass of water. The room stilled just a fraction, enough to feel it. Sloane's laugh was delayed, thinner this time. She turned to refill glasses, deflecting with performance. Harlan didn't say anything, but he looked at me. Really looked, and something flickered in his gaze. Not pity, not discomfort, recognition. Maisie, seated beside me, reached under the table and squeezed my hand. I glanced down. She gave a small, triumphant clap with her other hand, concealed by the tablecloth. The dinner went on. Sloane talked about renovations, about yoga studios, and open shelving. I contributed where I felt moved to, not to challenge, not to impress, just to be present, to be real. At one point, a woman I hadn't spoken to before, Elaine, I think, leaned over while Sloane was pouring dessert wine and said quietly, "You have a grace that doesn't shrink. This house, it feels warmer when you're in it." I looked at her. "You're the reason it feels like a home," she said. I didn't cry, but I felt something unclench in my chest, a quiet exhale I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. After dessert, I helped gather plates, not out of obligation, but out of rhythm. Habit I chose, not one assigned. Sloane didn't say much the rest of the evening. Her voice stayed polite, edges duller now. Maybe from awareness, maybe from exhaustion. Harlan hugged me goodnight, not a pat, a hold, brief, intentional. I returned to my room and slipped the pearls into their box, not hidden away this time, but placed gently atop the bookshelf. They didn't need to be worn every day. They had done their work, and so had I. The letter wasn't hidden exactly, just waiting. It surfaced on a Tuesday morning while I was digging through my sewing kit, looking for the thimble Maisie had taken a liking to. The kit had once belonged to my mother, though I'd added to it over the years. My thread spools beside hers, her bone-handled seam ripper beside my newer one, dulled by time. Folded neatly beneath the pincushion, a yellowing envelope, my name on the front. In her handwriting, Vivian, no dear, no date, just me, as if the letter had always belonged to this moment. I opened it with careful hands. Dignity doesn't always speak, but it always remembers, it read. When they forget who you are, remember who raised you. Remember who you are. I didn't cry, not yet. That came later, after I reread the line 3 more times and let it settle deep into the spine I had spent years learning how to stand with again. That night, I journaled for hours. Not just events, but versions of myself I'd buried along the way. I wrote, I have been a daughter who flinched, a wife who bent, a mother who swallowed silence like communion, a ghost who unpacked boxes into a room that wasn't hers, and now, a woman who has learned to leave a door open and still feel safe. I signed it, Vivian Ellis, no Nana, no footnotes. A week later, I booked a train to Maine. Loretta met me at the station in a navy sweater and salt-specked boots. Her hair had gone wild with silver, and she didn't bother taming it. She never had. We didn't talk much on the drive to her house. We didn't need to. Her home was crooked in all the right ways. Wood slats creaked. The porch overlooked a small clearing of pine trees, dark and endless. The air smelled like pine and rain-soaked bark. We drank wine wrapped in quilts. She asked about Maisie. I asked about the painting she never finished. Then, as dusk folded over the sky, I told her everything. The deed, the pearls, the tea, the filing. She nodded once. Knew you'd find your way back. Inside, she showed me to the guest room. It was messy, but lived in. books stacked like furniture, an old typewriter on the desk. "You still write on that?" I asked. She grinned. "Sometimes it's nice to hear the words fight their way out." I sat down that night, window cracked open, pine air whispering through the screen. I fed the paper in gently, typed a title across the top. The Guest Room Chronicles. No subtitle yet, no preface, just the promise. I typed until the keys clicked in rhythm with my breath. The stories weren't in order. They didn't need to be. I wrote about a cardigan's frayed cuff, about a girl with a chipped teacup, about a woman who found a deed in a velvet pouch and remembered how to claim space. The paper curled with ink. The lamp glowed yellow over the desk. Outside, the trees stood like old women, rooted, wind-blown, unbent. Inside, I wrote like someone who'd lived enough lives to finally begin. I walked the house the morning after I returned from Maine, not as an intruder, not as a guest, just as a woman with a key, a name on paper, and a spine that no longer bent for approval. The walls greeted me like old acquaintances. I ran my hand across the trim in the hallway, the grain of the banister, the dent on the doorframe where Harlan once scraped his backpack in a rush to school. I wasn't reclaiming the house. I was reclaiming my place in it. The kitchen still hummed with Sloane's order, pantry labels still sharp, fruit bowls still rotated by color. I touched the edge of the counter where I once scrubbed silently and nodded once to myself. The dining room held no ghosts, just chairs, plates, glass. No longer a stage, just a space. In my room, the curtains swayed with a soft breeze. The indigo glowed in the light. My bookshelf stood like a quiet altar, pearls resting atop my journals, spine out, history named. There were no announcements, no declarations, just breathe, intent. Stillness without submission. Later that afternoon, I made tea. The good kind, loose leaves in a ceramic pot, steeped long and warm. I carried the cup onto the porch and set the small ceramic bowl on the railing. Inside it, the printed household schedule. It was curled slightly at the corners from weeks of indifference. I tore it in half, then again, folded it into the bowl and lit a match. The fire caught slowly, then took. The pastel paper blackened and curled. Flames licked the air without apology. The label maker font turned to smoke. Maisie padded onto the porch, still in her socks, holding something in her hand. She sat beside me without asking, watching the ash swirl like snow. "What was that?" she asked. "Something I don't need anymore," I said. She nodded, then held up her hand. "I made you something." It was a bracelet, threaded on elastic, lumpy beads in uneven colors. In the middle, white cube letters spelling VIV. "Not Nana?" I teased gently. She shrugged. "You have lots of names." I slid the bracelet on my wrist. It caught the light just right, imperfect and bright. We sat there for a long time. No instructions, no chore lists, no roles. Just two women, one learning, one unlearning, watching smoke rise from paper that once tried to contain them both. That evening, I opened my journal for the final time. I wrote, "She called my clothes embarrassing, I wore my past like pearls," and signed my name back into the walls. Vivian Ellis. Some stories aren't told. They're claimed, stitched into silence, and pulled thread by thread back into light. If you've ever felt erased in your own home, this story was written for you. There's more where this came from, where memory becomes resistance and quiet women burn the scripts they were handed. Stick around. The next chapter is already breathing. Subscribe to witness what happens when silence finally speaks.